Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope everyone's having a fantastic week. Last week, we had the pleasure of speaking with Chris and Autumn Timmins from Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance. And this week, we're going to continue that conversation with them, just because I feel like there's so much information that we have to cover on this topic. But Chris and Autumn are the founders of a nonprofit called Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance. They're working on bridging the gap between first responders and autism awareness training. So thanks again, guys, for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Very happy to be here.
I am too. I'm excited that you guys are here. This topic, as I've mentioned last week, is really near and dear to my heart because we are also a first responder family. And just to kind of recap last week's episode, we talked about, just some of the fears that we have as parents when our kids potentially interacting in a crisis situation with first responders, and why it's so important for our first responders to have that training. So if you didn't get a chance to tune into that episode, please do, because it's a wealth of information. But I just kind of want to jump right back in with you guys, and I really want to hear more about what your vision is and how you feel that Preston's Pursuit will make a difference for both first responders and the autism community. So what's the big vision for you guys?
I think the big vision is that first responders aren't going to be perplexed when they go to a call and they hear a family say, "My child is on the spectrum." And I think they're going to know, okay, I know how to handle this. Or if they don't go to a call where there's a parent, but they're there when your son's 18 or our son when they're 18, and they see something, they're like, I know what this is. Mm-hmm. I may not know how to handle every bit of it, but I know how to not make it worse.
Right.
And I know how to be patient and how to interact and do something and actually make it be a meaningful connection.
Right.
I also think it would be beautiful if, locally where we're at, we've done events with the community where we actually highlight and do events that we make it so kiddos want to be accepted, adults want to be accepted or on the spectrum, but we need to create that safe space so they can come and show up and have that interaction with the first responders when it's not during a crisis moment and they're not waiting in long lines to meet their police officer or their firefighter. They actually have kind of a safe event.
Right.
And they could walk in and just interact with them amongst their group, their people. And so then there's an understanding, right? And then I also would love it so we'll just talk from the police side. Somebody on the spectrum realizes police officers don't just wear blue or brown. They wear polo shirts. They wear blue jeans. Right. They wear tactical gear, and they know that that's a safe person to talk to. Same thing for a firefighter. They're not always wearing yellow turnouts. They're wearing polo shirts. They're wearing T-shirts or shorts or whatever. Right. And they know if I need something, I can go over to these individuals and say, I need help.
And speak with them. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's so important because, one, like we were talking about in the previous episode, the fear that you have as a parent, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, if there's a crisis situation, I don't know how my child's going to react, right? Or potentially how that first responder might react. Yeah. And there's always an underlying fear. So, what tips would you have for families, maybe preemptively, that they could do when, to know how to work with first responders, or maybe the verbiage that they could use or educate their children on, or soon to be adult children, say adult children, because my husband's an adult child. But I'm just saying, like, what verbiage, what quick tips or advice could you offer potentially families to help prep them for maybe a potential, interaction?
I think one thing would be kind of coming up with a script for if they had to call
Yeah.
911.
Absolutely.
That's a great idea.
Right? Like,
Yes.
there's important information that our communications personnel need to be able to get that information to those first responders so we can go to the call.
Yeah, because our
Best
dispatch
prepared.
is the first one that they're going to be
Yeah,
communicating
dispatchers,
with.
right.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that they have some key points of communication that they know.
You know, my child's high functioning, low functioning, level 1, level 2, level 3, or my child's autistic. Please don't show up lights and sirens if it's for a medical emergency.
Right.
You know, or my child doesn't like to be touched, or, you know, just certain things like that.
Or they have a favorite toy.
Something where the
Favorite toy.
dispatchers can relay that
Yes.
to the
Yes.
first responders.
which,
Yes.
which has we've had some key examples over there. We've had some success stories with that.
Right.
And so I think, just knowing what to communicate to our dispatchers is really helpful.
Absolutely. And, you know, and one of them is when you're out with your child, make it so the police officer isn't taboo. There's a lot of
Right.
times parents are like, if you're not behaving, I'm going to call that officer over here and
That's
have him
my
talk to you."
favorite.
Yeah.
I don't say that.
It's more of, hey, let's go talk to that officer. You know, let's meet that officer. Tell them your name and encourage
Make it
them.
more of a safe space.
Make it a safe space, right? It's all
Open
about
that line
safe
of
space.
communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're not fearful or afraid.
Right.
Absolutely. And then I think, you know, if their child has elopement issues, they should probably document where they think their child's going to go or things that their child is drawn to. And again, when they're calling 911, you're not going to be in your best moment when you're calling 911 because
Right.
as a parent, you're going to be frantic. You're going
Right.
to be upset, especially if your child's eloped.
Yeah.
But if they have a script of this is my child's name, this is what he's wearing or
Yeah.
she's wearing, and this is what they like. They like pools. They like sheep. They like farm animals because you live in a pasture area or whatever, right?
Right.
Get that to our dispatchers so we can deploy resources as quick as possible
possible.
to those places.
Yeah. And that I actually had an incident with Drayson, probably 6 years ago. He was 6 or 7 years old at the time, I think. Yeah, I think he was about 6 or 7. And he didn't want to go. We were going across the street to our neighbor's house for a barbecue or something. And he didn't want to go. We got him across the street and he got right up to the front door. He turned around and he ran back. Well, we saw him go across the street. I realized the front door was locked. So when I went back out to go get him, because my husband Pat was standing there too, and so we were like, we had all this barbecue stuff, so we're like, let's set it down. We turn around, we go back, and he's gone. And the door's locked, the front door's locked. I couldn't find him, and so I immediately went into panic mode. Immediately, I ended up running into the house, grabbing my car keys, getting in my car. My husband's grabbing his bike, and we're driving, and he's riding, and we're going all over the neighborhood. And finally, at probably a good solid 10 minutes, and I finally said, should we need to call 911. Like, where is he at? Well, because he was unhappy about going across the street. My husband had left his truck unlocked. He went in the truck and was laying on the floor. We had passed him probably 15 other times.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was just, because he was pissed, he was on the car floor. And my dear friend Brianna found him. She walked back across the street and she was like, she just had the thought of, I wonder if the car's, open. Sure enough, she opened it up and he was right there. And when the police showed up, of course I'm like, we literally had just found him when the officer pulled up, and I was like, hi. We found him. He's fine. And I had to explain to the officer that, of course he got out and did like a welfare check with Drayson, but Drayson wouldn't respond to him. And so I had to explain, he's on the spectrum. He's partially nonverbal. Like, I just didn't know, because my fear was, did somebody drive by and take him? Did he just take off running to the park? Like, where did he go? And I think one thing that I had really struggled with was on dispatch, because when she was asking me questions, I was so distracted because I was so distressed that I just couldn't even think straight.
Right.
So I think you bring a really interesting point, is that if you have a script, because looking back, I wish I would have had that. I wish I would have had something like where I knew I had learned it to prep myself to be able to give the right information.
Yeah.
Right?
Because she's like, well, which way did you see an approximation which way he went? And I was like, I don't know. Like I
Yeah.
was the hysterical mom.
Because you were
Right.
stressed out.
Right.
Yes.
And, yeah, which is understandable.
I'm sure I was not a model caller.
That's
Right.
okay. It's
But
understandable.
right, but
Yeah.
you know, I think you bring up a really valid point, Chris, in terms of, you know, creating that script. Do you feel that it would be advantageous, like if they have a care team that they work with where they have goals? Do you think it would be
Yes.
helpful for the care team to help them with that as well?
I absolutely do. And that's
Yes.
another point is if you've got a care team and they're working on goals
Yeah.
and say your child has a cell phone or, you know, they're able to use their watch or text it, whatever,
Something, yeah.
have that caregiver teach that child to pay attention to the street signs and intersections and like large landmarks. Because
Okay.
say your child gets lost and they call the phone and they just call you. They don't even call 911 and you're
Right.
like, where are you?
Right.
And you don't have a GPS on their phone or something.
Right.
And they're like, I don't know, but they look and they're like, I'm at, you know,
I see
Southern
this.
and
Yeah.
Stapley and there's a McDonald's.
Okay. Yeah.
You're like, okay, I'll find it. You know,
Yeah.
worst case scenario, you have to pull up the map on your
Yes.
phone and do satellite view as the parent to go get them. But
Yeah.
teaching that child to pay attention to those street signs and where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's huge as well, especially if they did have to call 911 because they're not talking to a trusted individual and they're
Right.
talking to somebody that's reading off of a script as well.
Right.
And one of the questions they're going to repetitively ask is, where are you? And if
Right.
you're like, well, I'm here, that's not going to help
That
anybody.
doesn't help, right?
But if
Yeah.
you're like, oh,
So true.
I know to look up, and teaching them the different colors of street signs. You know, in
Yes.
Arizona,
Yeah.
every city or municipality has a different street kinds color. I know. So they could be on Lindsay and Gilbert and it's green. They could be on Lindsay and Mesa and it's white.
Yeah.
And so that if they're like, I'm at Lindsay and whatever, and they're like, the sign is white. The dispatcher, even though they might not be a Mesa dispatcher, but they're a
Right.
Gilbert dispatcher, they're like, well, we don't have signs with white,
Right.
so we need to transfer them to Mesa.
Right. So they understand. It
Correct.
gives that dispatcher the familiarity of where to direct them to or where to
Exactly.
send people.
Get those
Right.
resources. It's all about getting
Yeah.
the resources in a timely manner.
Yeah, and it's funny because we did that with Drayson at a young age. We did like safety sign, you know, so we would be driving down the road and, you know, what does that mean? Stop sign. And what do? You know, we stop and how do we cross the street? You know, look both ways. And what does this mean? That means there's a crosswalk. But I think the street signs is interesting because that's not something that we've leveled up with yet.
Right.
So that would be a way for us to level up that.
Right.
Drayson's also entering the age where he wants his own phone. So excited again about that. But I do want him to have one, and so we just met with his care team actually last week to incorporate a goal on how to send a text message, you know, how to call mom or dad, like simple basic stuff, but then also, you know, how to call and when it's appropriate to call, because
Right.
the other caveat to that is I don't want him to call 911 every time. I'm like, if you need help, you call 911, and it's
Right.
like he needs help, you know, cooking his dinner.
Right.
Like, you know, like
Right.
Yeah.
it's also that fine line of them understanding the scenarios of when to call 911.
We've kind
Yeah.
of battled that with Preston because, like, he likes to go on bike rides.
Okay.
But we've found that he's been in some pretty not so great situations with that. He came home one time where the bike was in shambles. He was covered in, loss of skin. He looked like
poor
he
baby.
had been in a horrific accident. We had no idea what happened. He couldn't communicate with us what had happened. And luckily, one of our neighbors actually had witnessed he had ran into the back of somebody's parked car. And of course, we were like, oh, God, now we have to go, like, apologize to whoever's car he had ran into. But, he couldn't communicate with us.
Right.
Like and he's verbal, but he doesn't know how to, express needs, wants, hurt, aches, anything like that. And so, and it was really distressing for us because he comes home and he's bleeding and he's, clearly something
Horrifying
horrifying had happened.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and we're like, oh my God, you know. And then our neighbor comes over later and says, "So I saw something," and we're like, "What happened?" And it's hard, it is. It's really hard because we wanted him to have that sense of independence to be able to ride his bike in the neighborhood. But so it is. It's really hard.
I've talked about too creating or putting a card in Drayson's like wallet or in his backpack that says that he's on the spectrum. You know,
Yeah.
especially now, like I said, like now that he is getting older, that's my biggest fear is like, or could I even, train him, for lack of better words, right? That, you know, when you hand them the ID, you hand them this card too that says, I'm on the spectrum, I may have certain behaviors or,
Yeah.
you know, things like that. It for me, you know, this conversation kind of solidifies that, like, you know, maybe these are things that we've done the basics, right?
Yeah.
But now it's time to really level up on
Yeah.
what we're doing. And so I think that's wonderful insight that you give for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's even good to teach them, you know, if they are lost and they don't know, to take a photograph of the street sign and send it to mom or dad in a text.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Right? Then you
that's
know where it's at.
That's a fantastic idea.
But the leveling up that you talk about with the card that you want to give him, again, that's something that we want to encourage those parents
Yeah.
to create that relationship with their first responders.
Right.
Because if the first responder doesn't know what to do with that card,
Yeah.
and they don't know to look at it, they're looking for an insurance
They're
card,
looking something
or they're
else, yeah.
looking for a driver's license.
Right.
So if they know that they need to look for that card and they get
Yeah.
the training from us, like you've been presented this card,
Right.
and every kiddo's might be different, right? Or if they
Right.
get a uniform one just offline,
Right.
they still need to employ the tactics and the training that we're teaching so they can meet the needs of that individual kid.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like you and Autumn have said, you only meet one. You've met one.
You've only met one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're all unique, you know.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think it's so important that we try to cultivate that positive relationship between first responders and the autism community.
Right.
And you just saying, like, you know, instead of saying, you know, if you misbehave, I'm going to have that officer come over and get
Yeah.
you, kind of thing. You know, it's, you know, do you have any words of advice to parents on maybe how to initiate that conversation with a first responder if they see one out? You know, what would be something that they could easily ask that first responder if they have their child that's also on the spectrum with them?
You know, I think it would just be an introduction. I want to introduce my son to you. And, you know, if the son or daughter is shy and doesn't want to make contact, I think that's where they say, and by the way, my child's on the spectrum, and then make it a positive, right? Like, this is Officer so-and-so. This person's friendly.
Right.
You can go to them if you need something. And a lot of times those officers and first responders and even firefighters, they're going to beam a little bit. They're going to feel real proud because now they're being recognized for their service, but not hearing thank you for your service.
Right.
And they're going to take the time to make that interaction.
Yeah.
Or even if the child's not feeling comfortable having that engagement, just the parent leading that.
Seeing that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
like
maybe-
a mentoring, a
Yes.
peer modeling kind of
That's a
thing.
great
Yeah,
point.
Yeah.
so the
Great
parent
point.
can go
Yeah.
up and say, hi, my name is so-and-so. It's such a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for being here today, or what have you.
Right.
And then the child is seeing that positive engagement.
Yeah.
And so the child doesn't feel like they're being forced or needing to have that, you know, and
Right.
then they just see that positive interaction.
Right.
Because not every child is going to feel comfortable having that initial interaction, but
Right.
at least they're seeing that positive interaction.
Right.
And so then maybe next time they'll be more inclined to do
Client.
that.
Yeah. And then you have, like, Drayson has a couple friends that they're talkers. They're so sweet.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they'll ask a million questions, you know?
Yeah.
And so, I think navigating that side of it too, like, you know, okay, like he's obviously very verbal, but he still might not be able to articulate a want or need.
Right.
And I think, parents expressing that, like, he's going to ask you a lot of questions,
Right.
but, you know, he doesn't really express wants or needs.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think also creating that understanding is really important, because you brought up a really good point about that. Like, Preston speaks. He speaks very beautifully. Like, you know,
Yeah.
Drayson's starting to speak more, but he doesn't always articulate what he's been through, what he's feeling, his frustrations. Like, Drayson,
Exactly.
there's sometimes the behavior comes out because he can't articulate
Right.
what he's feeling.
Yeah, because he's
So,
frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's frustrated, you know?
Totally understandable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the parents out there should, you know, get involved with their community and their local first responders, because they're all going to have events, and, you know, eventually we want to encourage these agencies to have events to bring the community in. But get to meet your fire station that's going to be responding to your house. Get to meet that crew. Get to meet those
Yeah.
police officers that patrol your neighborhoods when it's not a crisis situation. Because a lot of times we'll remember a face. We might not remember everything about them, but we're like, oh, that child lives at that house. That child's in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
We want to know about those things so we can be proactive or really quick in our response if there is an emergency.
Well, especially because you guys are, you know, police officers are continually driving around, right?
Yes.
They're on patrol, so they do recognize certain landmarks or faces or people. And I think too, you know, we're really lucky here where we are in Arizona that there's a lot of community events to create that. So, you know, for parents, I would encourage them to also, you know, look for those community events with your first responders, and actively participate to help create that understanding for the first responders.
Yeah.
I always ask this question to parents that have a child on the spectrum, and I always like to ask this question. So it's similar but a little bit off topic. But what advice would you have for parents, especially when they're dealing with a new diagnosis? Because I felt like to some degree that was a crisis situation for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh,
You know what
yeah.
I mean? Like it's just navigating that sea of diagnosis, right? But what do you have any words of wisdom that you would give to parents that are facing a new diagnosis and what they can do, and any words of encouragement for them?
Well, again, like I just personally, I didn't see it as a way of defining my son. I saw it as, how are we going to move forward, and tools to help him be successful in life. And it was a means of let's find the therapies, the providers, and so for me, it was a means of let's find that community, the resources to support. Initially, it was hard because I didn't know everything about it, because you hear that word and you're like, what
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, what do I do with that? And I see the look on the faces of so many parents when they first get that diagnosis, and how scary and how hard that is, and I feel that for them. But I think for me it was I was on a mission, and it was just about moving forward. Right. And just getting him the help and the support.
Do you feel that you guys had moments, though, where you kind of had to get out of your own head?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And times where I felt like, am I doing enough, or am I doing this right? And, what else can I be doing? And then, you all too many times feel like, is this the right provider? Is this the right resource? And
I think too, when you hit moments of defeat, right? That's when, at least for me personally, it's like I just wanted to lay down on the floor and surrender. Like I was like, I just don't know what else to do.
For sure.
But then you have those moments, and I'd allow myself to feel that moment, but then it's like okay, I got to dust myself off and get back in the game.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and we don't have like a family support system. It's, it's just us, and being a law enforcement family. I mean, there were many times where he was working many hours. I mean, he'd go weeks where he wasn't home because he was working.
Yeah.
Not because he didn't want to be home, but he couldn't be home. Yeah. And so it was just me, home with Preston, picking up the pieces, trying to figure this out. And so, I mean, it was hard. It was really hard, but worth every bit of it.
Right.
It was so worth it because, I mean, he's so loved. So
well, and I think it's, one of the very first podcast episodes I ever did was called, It Starts With Believing. And I think that, we all have those moments of belief when we see the potential in our child. And every time Drayson surprises me, I get mom guilt. I'm like, I completely underestimated my kid again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think every parent to some degree feels that, special needs or not. But it's just, I think feeling like you see that potential. And for me, it just made me want to keep going, right?
Yeah.
And so I always tell parents when I speak with them to find those moments of belief. Do you feel that there was a moment with Preston that you were like, yes, we are going to keep finding these resources because he's 100% capable?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's so bright. Like, the kid is just brilliant. I mean, the things that he he'll start talking to you about numbers and things, and you're like, I can't. Like, what are you even talking about? But he's just so brilliant and amazing.
He started talking to me about a series of books he was reading, I remember, and the details that he had on the characters and stuff. I was like, oh my God, I can't even remember.
Yeah. And he'll remember something, and I'm like, how do you remember that? And he's just so amazing and incredible, and I just,
I would agree with that. It's his analytical mind and the way he looks at things is I wish I could only look at it a third of the way that he does.
Right.
He is so passionate and amazing about computers and software and mathematics that he's going to solve problems that we're going to have when we get older, and he's going to figure it out. And we let initially that diagnosis be defining, but it's not. It just means that he's going to be better at something else than we're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we've had
different gifts,
teachers tell us that like his ability for coding is like nothing else they've seen.
Yeah.
And so we're like, you can tell us, but don't even start talking to us about that because I have no idea.
You have no idea what's going on. I know. And Preston's going to college, right?
Yeah, so he's a year ahead, and he graduated high school this past year a year ahead with 6 credits of college.
That's amazing.
So yeah, we're just blown away by him. And I feel like I want to throw up thinking about it.
Like, oh my God.
A little nervous about him going to college.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that on the next episode.
I'm super excited for him, but also
You might
a
have
little
to give
nervous.
us a few episodes to
I
get
know we
used to
have a few
that.
more episodes on how to cope with
So
spending your
excited,
He's
but
amazing with being able to help his little brother with physics homework and mathematics. And
Yeah.
And he's
well, his little brot's also brilliant. So
Yeah.
yeah.
They're both super smart kids.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're such sweet kids. And I remember seeing, it was I think a post that you had made on Facebook or something about him going to college, and it inspired me. And now I'm going to try not to get emotional, Autumn. It inspired me because I think that that's one of the big hopes that I have for Drayson.
Yeah.
it'll happen.
I want him to go to college,
capable.
and
Yep.
and here I know there's a lot of the community colleges here and stuff are trying to create more programs that are based for people on the spectrum, which I think is fantastic. But I think that personally inspired me in a way that I was like, I want so much to put Drayson into that level.
Yeah.
And so it was really inspiring to see that Preston was
Thank you.
going to go to college and accept going to college. And I think that brings a lot of hope for parents like us that do have younger kids, that the unknown is still there. And Drayson has many talents, and I know he'll figure out what that talent is. It's just, they're so
Believing
unique
in
in their own way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like at this point I've made that decision. I've made that commitment. Like I have no other choice but to believe in the fact that he's going to be okay.
Absolutely.
And the preteens, though, he is getting much more clear on expressing his wants and needs.
Yes.
Like, no, all the time.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Yeah. So how can agencies or communities reach out to you guys if they're interested in learning more about Preston's Pursuit, or maybe there's a training? I encourage all the listeners today that, if you're a first responder family, or if you have loved ones that are first responders, please let your local communities know that this training is available for first responders. And it's not just for police officers and firefighters. Eventually, Preston's Pursuit is expanding into, is dispatch part of that as
Dispatch
well?
is going to be one of it as
Dispatch,
Absolutely.
emergency room.
Emergency rooms, event security, TSA, because that's a whole nother hurdle.
Yes, that's, yeah.
So we want to get it out there so everybody understands that it's an invisible disease, right?
Right.
Visible diagnosis.
Invisible, yeah.
But
That
it
is
doesn't
fair.
mean that they can't treat somebody better.
It's
even
always
if
my
they're not.
favorite comment too when they see Drayson. He doesn't look
Yeah.
like he has autism,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
We've heard that too.
what is it supposed to look like?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like, exactly.
We've heard it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I encourage our listeners, get the word out. If you are a first responder family, if you have loved ones, or somebody that's a first responder, this training is available for agencies to partake in. And I think that's, I think it's fantastic what you guys are doing, truly. I
Thank
mean,
you.
I'm so, on a personal note, I am so unbelievably proud of both of you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I hope you know that.
Thank you.
Yes. thank you.
So how can communities get in touch with you, or agencies if they're interested?
Through our website, prestonspursuit.org, or also we're on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance.
Yeah.
Definitely through that, but like discovery calls are amazing, virtual meetings are amazing. The training is not going to be something where it's going to be internet based because
Okay.
we
Yeah.
don't believe there's a good value behind
It's
that.
really good that you brought that up. Yeah.
We really think that the value is having that training right there. So
In person.
in
Yeah.
person, so we could
Yeah.
talk. Like our first module is going to be what is not impairment.
It's interactive. We want it to be in person. It matters.
It matters.
Yeah.
Questions. And I will tell you, being an officer, there's always officers asking the what if question. Well, we want to be able to answer those what if questions.
Yeah,
and you
right.
can't do that if you're doing it
If
through
it's
an
just an
online
online,
module.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think and that's currently what some of the autism training is, correct?
Yes.
It's like
Other organizations.
you'll get on,
yeah.
you take an online course, if you will.
Yeah.
And you're right, it is. And the other aspect is I'm talking to first responders as a first responder. I've got
Yeah.
25 years throughout corrections, investigations, patrol, everything. So I'm talking to a first responder and as a father.
So you have both sides of
sides
that
of it.
of that perspective.
Yeah,
Right.
which
And
we feel is really important, and I feel like first responders would probably feel that that's a key piece.
We relate better to other first responders, and we have firefighters that are going to be teaching the firefighter course, and we have
Wonderful.
people that way we're relating to our group,
It
to our
matters.
clique, and it matters because I know what it's like to put on a vest and
Yeah.
go to a house when a family is all dysregulated,
Right.
and sometimes I can't just count to 5
Right.
and let everybody calm down. So I get that, and I've walked in those shoes again as a father and as a first responder.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
No, again, I think the work that you guys are doing is absolutely fantastic. You're going to be busy after you retire, Chris.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. That's the plan.
You're going to be really busy after you retire. So I'll post all the information as well in the show notes today for those of you listening in. I'll post all of your information also in the show notes so that if anyone wants to reach out to you guys, but please go to prestonspursuit.org and look it up and read about them some more and encourage your local agencies to book a discovery call with them.
Yeah.
Because this training is invaluable and it is so needed. So I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for
you.
being on the
Thank
show
you.
today.
Thank you for having us. It
Thank
was
you.
a pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely. This concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have a question, a comment, or even a show topic that you would like to hear about, please feel free to send me an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram if you haven't already, and feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Pieces for My Puzzle. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate all of you. Keep working on your puzzle, and remember, you don't have to have it all solved in a day. Take care.